Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at the fallout
Okay.
from the recent California wildfires, and specifically how all this is impacting insurance.
Sounds good.
We've got two sources for this deep dive,
Yeah.
an article from Insurance Business America,
Mm-hmm.
and a really interesting interview from PBS NewsHour that really gets into, like, the people,
The human side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And our goal here is to give you kind of the tools or the background knowledge
Right.
and understand what's happening here.
Yeah.
And maybe even extrapolate a little bit to what this could mean for the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really incredible how quickly these events can spiral.
Yeah.
You have the immediate impact, which is, obviously devastating.
Right.
But then these fires kind of trigger this chain reaction that
Yeah.
impacts things far beyond California.
Yeah, for sure. And the Insurance Business America article really highlighted that for me, I think.
Yeah.
It's easy to just see the numbers. 24 lives lost, thousands of people displaced.
Right.
But behind those numbers are real families, real communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's just the scale of the damage. So thousands of acres infrastructure destroyed
Mm-hmm.
across multiple towns. Palisades, Eaton, Hurst.
Yeah, those aren't just names on a map anymore.
Right, exactly.
People's lives.
Yeah, and then you add on the financial toll. I mean,
Right.
some estimates are putting the damages at somewhere between 245 and 270 billion,
Wow.
which potentially, I mean, if those numbers hold up,
Yeah.
could be one of the costliest disasters in American history.
It's hard to even fathom
Yeah.
that amount of money. But the crazy thing is these costs don't stop at California's border.
Right, so let's get into that ripple effect.
Okay.
The article mentioned European reinsurance companies bracing for impact.
Yes.
Could you maybe take a minute to explain what is reinsurance and why is this hitting them so hard?
Sure. So reinsurance, it's kind of like insurance for insurance companies.
Yeah.
So when you have a huge disaster like this, the initial insurers, they turn to these bigger reinsurance companies to help cover those huge payouts.
So they spread the risk?
Exactly. It's a safety net
Oh, okay.
for the entire industry. But that safety net,
Right,
it has its limits.
of course.
And we're seeing those limits tested right now.
So companies like Swiss Re, Munich Re,
Mm-hmm.
the article named a few others,
Yeah.
they're all looking at losses from these California wildfires, hundreds of millions of euros each.
It's huge.
And that's even causing their stock prices to dip, which is a pretty clear sign that this is a
Yeah.
big deal.
This is a major event.
Yeah.
And it shows how what's happening in California is impacting the global insurance market,
Wow.
which means that we could all feel the effects down the line, potentially through higher premiums and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is, even when it comes to insurance.
And it's not like this vulnerability in California's insurance market is anything new.
Right.
The article talked about the 2018 Camp Fire
Uh-huh.
as kind of a turning point.
Yeah.
After that, big insurers like State Farm, Allstate,
Big names.
they started pulling back. They were refusing to issue new policies or even renew existing ones.
Especially in those high-risk fire zones.
Yeah.
It makes sense from a business perspective, but
Yeah.
it leaves a lot of people vulnerable.
So now, according to LendingTree, over 10% of California homeowners are uninsured.
That's a scary statistic.
Yeah, that's like 806,000 people
Wow.
facing these wildfires without a safety net.
And some counties have even higher rates of uninsured homeowners.
Like which ones?
They mentioned Kings Lake Humboldt.
So those are some of the areas that were hit hardest by these recent fires.
Yeah, it's a pretty grim picture.
Yeah, and that's where I thought the PBS NewsHour interview really brought in that human element.
Yeah, for sure.
They spoke with Amy Bach from United Policyholders, which is a consumer advocacy group.
Okay.
And she talked about this like widespread anxiety among homeowners who are dealing with the aftermath of these fires.
Yeah, it makes sense.
They're facing so many questions like, how long until they see any insurance money?
Right.
Will their temporary housing be covered?
Mm-hmm.
Will they have to fight for every penny that they're owed?
It's a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
You lose everything, and then you have to deal with all of this uncertainty on top of it.
Right.
I mean, for a lot of people, their home insurance is supposed to be that safety net that allows them to rebuild.
Yeah.
But with the insurance market in such turmoil, that safety net is feeling pretty flimsy right now.
Yeah, definitely. And for those who can't even get regular insurance.
Right.
There's the California Fair Plan.
Yeah, the FAIR Plan.
It's kind of a last resort option, right?
Exactly. It's a state-backed program
Okay.
designed to provide coverage for people who can't get it through the traditional insurers.
So like a backup.
Yeah, but as more and more people are getting shut out of that regular market, the FAIR Plan is getting stretched really thin.
So it's not really a sustainable solution.
Well, the PBS NewsHour report said it's actually tripled in size over the past couple of years.
Wow.
About 500,000 people are relying on it now.
That's a lot of people.
It is, and it's not really designed to handle that kind of volume.
So even the Fair Plan comes with its own set of problems.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Can you explain what those are and how they're impacting homeowners?
Sure. So one of the biggest downsides is the cost.
Okay.
It's a lot more expensive than traditional insurance,
Okay.
which can be a real burden for homeowners who are already struggling.
Especially after a fire.
Exactly. And on top of that, the coverage is often more limited.
Meaning?
It might not cover all the costs of rebuilding or replacing everything.
So it's not a perfect solution.
Not by the long shot. It's a tough situation.
It really is. You need insurance, but you can't afford it, or it doesn't cover enough. It's a real dilemma.
Yeah.
So what are some things that California is doing to try to address this whole crisis?
Well, the California Insurance Commissioner recently allowed insurers to raise premiums after disasters.
So they can charge more
Yeah, the idea is to make it more attractive for them to stay in the market.
by letting them potentially profit more.
Exactly. But, as Jake Biddle pointed out,
And who's Jake Biddle?
oh, he's the author of The Great Displacement.
Okay.
And he was interviewed on PBS NewsHour, and he made the point that there's no guarantee this will work.
Right. Insurers could just raise rates and still limit coverage.
Exactly, especially in those high-risk areas.
So homeowners are stuck with high premiums and not enough protection.
The worst of both worlds, really.
It's a tough spot to be in. So what happens to those who are uninsured or underinsured when a wildfire destroys their home?
It's a tough question.
What options do they even have if they can't afford to rebuild?
Well, unfortunately, the options are pretty limited.
In what way?
Well, the PBS NewsHour report highlighted that the federal government's role in disaster relief is pretty small.
Oh, so they're not stepping in to help.
Not in a major way. There might be some assistance with temporary housing.
Okay.
And maybe a little help replacing some belongings.
But not enough to rebuild.
No, the bulk of the burden falls on the individuals.
So you're talking about people being forced to move to cheaper areas or downsize to a rental or even leave the state altogether.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about.
It really is. It's a whole other layer of displacement caused by these wildfires.
And that's what Biddle was talking about, this idea of displacement as a consequence of climate change.
Okay.
He argues that these disasters are not just about the immediate damage, but about these long-term shifts in where and how people live.
So that breaks up communities.
Exactly, and that raises all sorts of social and economic questions.
It's not just about rebuilding homes, it's about rebuilding lives.
Right, and that's where I think this conversation needs to shift.
Okay. In what way?
From just reacting to individual disasters to addressing these larger systemic issues.
So are we just stuck in this cycle of disaster insurance crisis and displacement?
Well, Biddle is a big advocate for what he calls mitigation.
What's that?
It's basically taking proactive steps to reduce the risk of wildfires in the first place.
So not just waiting for the next fire to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He argues that we can't just keep throwing money at the problem after the fact.
Makes sense.
We need to invest in making our communities more resilient to fire.
Okay, so what would that look like in practice? What kind of proactive steps are we talking about?
Well, there are different levels to consider.
Like what?
Well, on an individual level, homeowners can adopt fire-resistant building practices.
So like using different materials when they build?
Yeah, things like fire-resistant roofing and siding,
Okay.
and creating defensible space around their property.
Studies.
Yeah, clearing brush and vegetation away from the house.
Oh, so the fire is less fuel?
Exactly. But of course, there are challenges there.
Like what kind of challenge?
Well, cost is a big one. Retrofitting existing homes to meet fire-resistant standards can be really expensive,
And I imagine a lot of people can't afford that.
especially after a fire has already caused damage.
Right. And then there's also the issue of, people not wanting to do it,
Yeah. Homeowner reluctance is a real problem.
especially if they haven't personally experienced a wildfire.
They might think it won't happen to them.
Right, where they just don't want to spend the money.
It's understandable, but it's a risky gamble.
So it's not just about having the knowledge and the technology, it's about changing behaviors and attitudes.
Absolutely.
So what about communities and the government? What role do they play in all of this?
Well, they can do a lot to promote mitigation efforts.
How so?
Communities can establish stricter building codes.
That prioritize fire safety.
Right, and they can promote fire-safe landscaping practices through education and outreach programs.
Okay, and what about the government?
They can provide financial incentives for homeowners who make their properties more fire-resistant.
So like tax breaks or subsidies.
Exactly.
So it's really a multifaceted approach.
It has to be.
Individuals, communities, and governments all working together.
To create a safer environment for everyone.
And that also requires us to rethink how we design and develop communities in the first place.
Yeah, community design is a crucial part of this.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? What does fire-resistant community design actually look like?
Well, it involves thinking about how we build communities in a way that minimizes wildfire risk.
Okay.
This could mean strategically locating homes away from the most fire-prone areas.
Okay.
Designing neighborhoods with fire breaks and defensible space.
Okay.
And incorporating fire-resistant landscaping.
So basically, we need to move away from those sprawling suburbs that are nestled right up against the foothills.
Yeah, that's a pretty common sight in California.
Right.
It would definitely be a shift from traditional development patterns.
Yeah.
We need to move away from just reacting to wildfires
Okay.
and start proactively designing communities that are more resilient.
Yeah, that makes sense, but it sounds like a huge undertaking.
It is.
But I can see how incorporating fire safety into like the very fabric of our communities,
Right.
from the individual homes to the neighborhood layout to even regional planning,
Absolutely.
that could make a big difference.
It could be a game changer.
Yeah. This is
Yeah,
this is a lot to process, I think.
it is.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like the broader implications of this insurance crisis.
Well, I think it's important to remember that this goes way beyond California.
In what way?
We're seeing more frequent and more severe natural disasters everywhere.
Because of climate change.
Exactly. Wildfires, hurricanes, floods, you name it.
Yeah.
And if insurance companies continue to struggle to keep up, it's not just California homeowners who are going to feel the effects.
Right. It could impact all of us.
It could lead to widespread economic instability,
Oh, wow.
social upheaval.
Mhm.
Imagine entire coastal communities being deemed uninsurable.
That's scary.
It is, people wouldn't be able to afford to rebuild. We could see mass displacement.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It raises a lot of questions for me, like, should government step in as like insurers of last resort?
It's a possibility.
Should we be exploring new models of community-based insurance?
That's an interesting idea.
And what about the impact on housing affordability? Huge issue.
If insurance costs keep going up,
Yeah,
homeownership in these high-risk areas
right.
could become totally out of reach.
It's already happening in some places.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It is. It really forces us to rethink how we adapt to these changes,
To climate change.
to all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, this whole conversation has really highlighted, Frank,
Mm-hmm.
this tension between individual responsibility and collective action.
That's a key theme here.
Where do we draw the line? You know,
A tough question.
is it up to each homeowner to protect their own property?
Right.
Or should governments and communities play a bigger role
It's a balancing act.
in creating a safer environment for everyone, between personal freedom and the common good?
Yeah, because on the one hand,
Right.
individuals should have the right to make their own choices about how they live
Of course.
and where they build their homes.
They should.
But on the other hand,
Right.
we have to think about the consequences of those choices,
Especially when it comes to something like wildfire risk.
because your neighbor's decision to not clear brush around their property
Yeah,
could impact your home even if you've done everything right.
absolutely. It shows how interconnected we all are and how individual actions can have these ripple effects.
Right. So it's not just about protecting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being a responsible member of the community.
Exactly.
So it seems like we need a multi-pronged approach.
I agree.
Individuals taking responsibility for their own properties,
Right.
coupled with communities and governments, creating a framework
Yes.
that supports those efforts
Yes.
and mitigates risk for everyone.
I think that's a great way to sum up this deep dive. The California wildfire crisis, it's not just an insurance problem or a climate problem.
Right.
It's a societal problem.
Mhm.
It challenges us to rethink how we interact with the environment,
Yeah.
with each other, and with the role of government.
Definitely gives us all a lot to think about.
It does, but it's also a call to action.
Yeah, I like that. So, to our listeners out there,
Mm-hmm.
the next time you see news about a wildfire,
Yeah.
Don't just focus on the immediate devastation.
Yeah.
Think about the bigger picture,
The systemic issues.
the choices we all make
And the steps we can take.
to create a better, safer future.
Well said.
We can do this.
Awareness is the first step.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.